Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nails and Beauty Talk, NFTs, crypto, and Web3. I'm your host, Asia the Bird. Today, I have a very special guest with me today. She's an artist and web designer. Please welcome Aoife O Dwyer. Hello, Aoife. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's good to be chatting to you.
Yes, good to be chatting with you too. So I want to go ahead and get started by asking where you're from and tell us about your art and illustration career.
Sure. Yeah, I'm from Ireland. Which is why if you read my name versus how you heard it pronounced, it might be a bit confusing. And yeah, I've been in the creative industry for probably 12 plus years. So that's kind of across design and illustration. And yeah, most recently in the kind of Web3 space, been focused on digital illustration, been working on a project called the Foofies. And yeah, making art like one-of-one art, and just, yeah, having a nice time.
That's really, really cool.
A very short version.
But I definitely want to get into also like who are like your favorite artists that you looked up to, like that you were inspired by?
That is such a hard question. I was thinking about this. I was like, this changes over time. And I think probably a lot of people can relate to that, where depending on where you're at or what you're into, it's different. So like when I think back to, so like I had a little brief flirtation with art college and I was doing a lot of photography. So some artists that were working around like identity, like Cindy Sherman is a big obvious one, that I was really influenced by at the time. And then that evolved into more recently when I found the Web3 space and the NFT space. And now when you ask me who my favorite artist is, like they're my friends. They're like the people I've gotten to know in the NFT space. And there's like so many. I was like, I don't even know if I can even start mentioning names because like there's just so many. But yeah, there's a few. There's one actually that came to mind. So there's two people who've been super supportive. So the first artist is called Technoveins. I think her handle is Girl Who Shivers everywhere. And she was one of the first people to really support and champion me in the NFT space and the Web3 space. And she also made like her project Hypnose is it is the first NFT that I ever bought. So I'm really embedded and attached to her as a person and her art and the whole community she's built and what she's doing. And then also Mombot is another big influence. So Mombot is somebody who I've been a fan of for years. Like before I'd even heard about Web3 or NFTs, she obviously has been working for a long time as well, and is quite established in her own right for a very long time. So what a kind of a nice experience for me has been is that I've gotten to know her through this space, and get involved with some of the things that she's working on and be invited to be part of the Ghost Club, which is a collective she formed last year. And I think when I think about that, really, I'm like, that's actually so amazing to me. It's one of my favorite things about this space. It's like how accessible, like really established, like awesome creators are.
Right.
And she, yeah, like her style, like she's got the cute thing going on. She's got the weird thing going on. I was like, yes, I'm all over it. I love all of that. So those are two that I definitely have to mention. But there's so many others who I absolutely love.
Yeah, that's really, really amazing. Now I want to get into your artwork. So how has your artwork evolved from how you first got into art?
It's totally different. Yeah. And again, like I hear this from people where I think I was definitely influenced quite heavily by like the ecosystems. I was in at different stages. So like for me, art was it's always been part of my life. I do come from quite a creative household or family. So it was always encouraged. So I did all through like primary, secondary school, like that. I did do a little bit of time at third level in art college. But all of those structures, it was very guided. It's like, when you're in secondary school, you're learning like the do's and don'ts, like the real like technical side of like how to draw a picture, like perspective, looking at things, observation, proportions, all of that stuff was a big part of those early experiences.
Right.
But I think externally there was lots of stuff I was really like drawn to in terms of like anime or like street art, and like subcultures. And I'm like, it never really felt totally involved in any of that, but I was really attracted to the visuals.
Right.
So I think there's like this real clash of this like mainstream, the institution, this is how you do it, versus these people that were just doing their thing because they loved it and they were just recreating culture as I went. And that was really attractive to me. So yeah, the evolution has been, like right now I'm doing kind of digital illustration. I think I did a lot of photography. So the two kind of main types of work or mediums that I've worked in have been photography, which has been actually film photography and like black and white photography. So like so different to what I'm doing now, which is digital and it's really colorful. But it was always about the same thing. Like I was always trying to chase the same concept, the same theme, try to answer the same questions. But I just went through a bunch of different mediums. I think drawing has probably been the most consistent thing. And yeah, most recently that's been digital, but also I've gone through paint and markers and paper and walls and canvas and anything I can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it very interesting because I went to art school, Savannah College of Art and Design here in the States in Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and you learn a lot of those things like perspective, proportion and stuff like that. But it's also too, it's really cool to see like everyone has their own unique art style. So even though we're taught these, fundamentals, that doesn't mean you can't develop your own art style where it's specifically unique to you. So, I like what you're doing because your work is very, very pastel. I like how you do the characters, the Foofies, how they have like plants come out of their eyes or something like that. So in terms of your whimsical style, like what are some things that you draw inspiration to?
Yeah, I think the big answer to this is it's a bit of everything that has ever impacted me ever in my life. Or the things I'm interested in. So like there's definitely they take a lot of inspiration from nature, obviously, but also like sci-fi and fantasy, and quite graphic. They're quite graphic. And I guess that ties into as well. Like I do come from a design background. I've spent most of my career in a design context. So I feel like all of those things have bundled into this. But fundamentally, they're all the things that I enjoy, which is great for me. I love them. And that was kind of a thing. I remember thinking about this recently. I was like, maybe it's related to the fact that they're, I've created them on the blockchain and they're an NFT project specifically, and I knew they were going to be commitment. So I was like, okay, if these are going to be something that I'm doing over a long period of time that I want to evolve and keep building, I need to love them. I need to enjoy them. Like they need to be something that I would enjoy collecting. So that was actually a big part of how they came about in terms of what I introduced into them. And like it was literally me being like, will I make a fantasy character? Will I make a creature? Will I make something that's more mythical? And I was like, what about all the things? Because some of them were kind of like alien sci-fi, and then some of them are more kind of magic mythical. And I was like, why not both? So that's kind of how they came together. Yeah,
that's really
all the things I like.
right, very mythical fantasy. Like how I was saying the pastel colors. What were like your favorite like sci-fi or fantasy films that you've watched?
Oh man. Gosh, I don't know even where to start with that. I'm like, I have never seen a sci-fi movie ever in my life. What I think of actually is like cartoons. Like, there's like, there's The Last Unicorn was something that was like a big influence, or even like cartoon shows. Like there's like Rainbow Bright, and she was like a bit like colorful and whimsical. Let me think. I'm not sure. Like so many things. Like, I guess maybe I can put a decade around it. So I'm 35, so I'm an elder millennial. So I had like influence through like the 90s, early noughties. Like that would have been a big, that's where like I'm kind of drawing the kind of pop culture and influences from in a big way, which is kind of interesting now because that seems to be kind of resurging. I'm like, I remember this when I was a child. So yeah, like it is quite an interesting time for me to see that like resurfacing. But yeah, I think a lot of that type of just hyper colorful and like a little bit trippy. Like I'm like, this was made for kids. Who made this? So now in retrospect, I'm like, okay, these came out of adult minds, which were definitely influenced. But yeah, like I think all that stuff is really interesting. It's definitely embedded in my psyche.
yeah, most definitely. Like, now, what are some of your favorite programs to use when creating artwork? Do you use Procreate, Illustrator? Like, what are some of your favorite programs?
Yeah, I'm almost exclusively working in Procreate. So yeah, like nearly everything I'm doing now is digital, and it's Procreate on an iPad Pro, Apple Pencil. I'm in that ecosystem. And yeah, like it's interesting actually when we touched on like learning. It's like that's kind of quite self-led, self-taught. So like, yes, I've had an art education to a degree, but definitely what I'm doing now is entirely self-taught. Which I think is the beauty of a lot of the digital tools that are available, is like, you can find, if it's digital, you can find the information on the internet. So yeah, it's pretty much entirely Procreate for the art I'm doing now. Yeah. Sometimes I will bring it into like Adobe Photoshop or After Effects if I want to move some things, but it's not rare. Like I think one of the skills that I would like to lean into a bit more, learn a bit more, is like animation. Because every time I look at them, I can think of the ways they would move, and I'm like, I don't have the skills for this yet. So sometimes I move little bits, just like basic stuff. But yeah, I think, I don't know if I have the patience for animation, but I really love seeing what people can do with movement and motion. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Same with me, because the whole thing is like, I just did an interview with this graphic artist named David Oku. And he does like, you know, these very colorful illustrations, but some of his work, he animates them in After Effects. And like, it looks so cool. You should check out his work. His work is really, really amazing. But yeah, I like how, you know, people animate their work. You know what I mean? It's really, really cool because it gives that pop to what they create.
Yeah, it's part of it for me as well as like it's building on the narrative. So I think everything that I've done has always been attached to narrative. Even I think the photography I did, they always look like movie stills, you know, they all are all still snapshots of a wider narrative. So I'm like, yeah, well, if it moves, it creates more of the character. It shows about more of their context, what they're doing, what might be about to happen, what just happened. So I think all those questions can be demonstrated so effectively with motion. So yeah, it's definitely the gap, I think. Maybe I'll team up with somebody who can make some stripy worms move. But yeah, I do think it's really cool. And I think as well, that's the thing is like lots of influence are from artists and creators who do stuff that I can't do, which I think is, you know, lots of people can relate to that. You're like, how do you do that? Or I see people doing stuff in 3D and I'm like, whoa. But yeah, like I think it is just that literal like skills gap, but it's also, it's the narrative. It's like how they're telling the story, how they're getting their message across. It's just a really nice medium, I think. Yeah. I also enjoy it a lot.
Yeah. It's really amazing to see. Now, what is your whole perspective in terms of like charging, you know, artists, you know, or charging artwork? Like, what's your whole perspective in pertaining to charging your work, especially when you work with clients?
Yeah, so it's hard. Like pricing is always hard. So for me, when I came in first, like I didn't have like a pre-existing art audience. Like in that way, I'm kind of Web3 native from an illustration perspective. You know, like I had this community around design, but like not around illustration. I'd never really worked commercially in illustration. I'd done some art and stuff, but not really to any major commercial success, put it that way. It was mainly pastime, hobbies. So I didn't have like a baseline where I could be like, well, this is €1 or $1, you know, equivalent that I can, you know, get from a client for this. So it was quite hard for me to try and price. So I definitely was like, I'll start low and see how it goes. Or like once I started to get to know people in the community, I just asked them. I was like, how much would you pay for this? You know, there's a kind of a benefit to once you're kind of in the community for a while and you build a community around you and the work you're doing and the stories you're trying to tell, you do have a base that you can be like, what do you guys think? So I definitely used that for the Foofies at the beginning. I was like, I'm thinking this or this. And then I priced them the first batch at the price that most people went for, which was 0.05 ETH at the time. So they're minted on Ethereum. But for the rest of the work, I kind of try and let the market decide. So there's a few one-of-one pieces that I've auctioned. And I think with that, it can be hard too, because some of the trouble I see sometimes, or the struggle that I see with some artists, is that they might start, like you can, with an auction, you can set a reserve or start price. And they might set that price that's just a little bit over what people are willing to start at. Because if you're starting an auction, people have that expectation that they might need to pay more to get the piece. So I did take this kind of approach. I was like, well, I've started at like the minimum I would be comfortable selling it for. So like if somebody, you know, bids less than I probably wouldn't accept it. So I was like, what's that number? So for me, and like, I mean, this is kind of about a year ago when I started. So it was like 0.25 ETH. And that worked for me. And, you know, it gained, and like, there's going to really been 2 pieces of foundation that I meant the first 2 one-on-one pieces on. And they went for that or just above that. In the meantime, as part of other projects and part of the Foofies pieces, I've gone for a lot more than that. But I keep starting at 0.25. So I've taken this approach of, I found a number which feels like it's accessible for most people to begin with. So if you get it, awesome, you got it at a fairly affordable price. Or, you know, maybe there'll be more interest and it'll go for more, but at least the beginning point is accessible for as much people as possible. And it's comfortable for me that I'm like, okay, I'd be happy if it goes for this price. Obviously better if it goes for more. And that's kind of how I approached it. So it is that kind of that question of like, what's the least you will be happy accepting for it and not feel bad about it, which in some cases is privilege. So like the market at the moment is quite slow. So sometimes you might have to start at a price that you're like, I really wouldn't like it to go at this price, but maybe it's enough to start a few people getting interested and then it can snowball. Ideally, not a guarantee. So you do have to be ready for it to go at that price or not go. Which is
Yeah. I think
that.
Yeah. It totally answers the question, because it can be hard in terms of pricing work, especially whether or not you've been involved in NFTs. Because the thing is that, even with myself, not only am I an illustrator, but I'm also in the beauty industry, because I'm a licensed cosmetologist and I'm a nail artist. So I do press on nails, and I see people who do these sets of press on nails or do like a nail service, and they charge low. And it's like, you're spending hours of time doing this work. You should be charging higher. And that's the thing that even I'm working on is, charging more for the work that I do. So, because that's very important.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is a big struggle across industries, like whether it's NFTs or Web3 or Web2, wherever it is. And yeah, like I think it is, there's two sides to this. Like this one part is that like, what's the minimum you can afford from a practical level? So obviously in some contexts, you've got materials, but also there's time. There's also how long have you been doing this? There's your skill level. Right. But there's also demand. I mean, ultimately, if you're the worst ever and like loads of people want your work, you can charge more for it, and vice versa. You could be amazing. Right. And if nobody cares, then nobody's going to pay for it. So like, I do think this, I mean, part of the question comes back to how do you generate enough visibility or enough demand for what you're doing that you can charge enough that is good for what you're doing in terms of covering your costs, that covers your effort, your time, also means that you can afford to live, which ultimately is what all of us are trying to do, is actually make a living. And that obviously depends on your wider context and where you're living and all the rest of it. There's so many things that impact that. But yeah, it can be tricky. But yeah, definitely value yourself. I think that's the big question that a lot of people struggle with is, do I stick to this price, which I know is what I'm worth, but is slower or like isn't getting as much traction? Do you have the luxury or the privilege and the ability to support yourself through waiting for something to be a bit slower while you build up that attention and supply demand ratio? Or are you in a situation where you totally just have to embrace, look, this might be a bit less than I would like it to be, but I need more people to be interested in what I'm doing. So you start low and you gradually build up, which is a good approach too. So, I mean, I'm kind of like a no shame, whatever your approach is, do what you need to do, but you need to recognize where you're at. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because especially within art school, having an art education, like they don't teach you a lot about how to understand your worth and your value. Like they teach you a little bit about business, but not to a depth of where like, hey, this is how you can have your own business. They do teach you a little bit of branding, but not to a depth of like how to understand pricing, how to price your work, especially when you work with clients or when you're freelance, things like that. That's something that I think art schools have to work on a bit more to get people more prepared into the business aspect of art.
I agree. Big time. Yeah. I think that side of, I mean, obviously it probably depends on where you were in the world. Time in Ireland, I think there was definitely an effort to include that type of education when I was in our college, which now realistically was kind of between 2008 and 2012. So it's a while ago. But yeah, it's even anybody I talk to, there still feels like that lack when you're out into the world. It's like, okay, so I know the creative bit, but now I need people to buy. And yeah, like, there is this like weird mysticism around like the integrity of the art, and like there's a real disconnect, I think, between art, which I don't know, there's like I don't know what it is, like maybe it's just like I have a slight disconnect between like the institution of art, where it's like, okay, there's these certain hoops or these like limitations or these gatekeeping practices which limit it from a lot of people, whereas if you kind of switch into a more commercial or business minded route to try and make a living off your creativity, which most people have to do, let's be realistic, I just am like, that's not less valuable for me. I'm like, of course that's valuable and you should be encouraged. That's a tangent, but yes. More business education, please.
Yes, absolutely. Now I want to talk about Boohoo. So you're an artist for Boohooverse. So what has that experience been like?
That was pretty awesome. Yeah. So that was the first time that I worked, well, one with a major brand, and two on an individual basis, and two with like creating assets for a large generative project. So obviously kind of once I kind of discovered NFTs and started spending some time in this space, you do come across the large generative projects, the PFP projects. They're kind of, or at least last year when I entered, they were kind of the main thing that people were focused on. And I kind of slowly learned around how they work. So there's individual layers, there's individual assets, and then they're all generated automatically through magic, computer magic, that forms these new avatars. Excuse me. But I'd never done that before. So like that was a really useful, I think, a really valuable experience for me in figuring out like the intricacies of, I mean, you have to be so accurate for like layering things up. It was also my first time working with a team. So there was a team of 4 artists working on it. Shout out to Reem and Amy and Shar. So they had already done a bunch of work when I joined the team. So there was this established style. There was like a real good sense of what would be needed to build out the collection. And it was just a really nice collaborative process. So like there was a team, like a team working with the main Boohoo brand, which are kind of like the Web3 bridge. And they were awesome. They were kind of coordinating everything, but they really gave us a lot of autonomy as a group of artists. They were like, okay, I mean, obviously we would like some of these clothes to be actual clothes and accessories you can buy off Boohoo. So we created a lot of assets, which were like, they're real things you can buy, which I thought was really fun. We got to pick which ones we wanted to do. So obviously each of us have our own unique style and stuff. So we were like, oh, I want to do this thing. And we were like, divvied it out that way. So that was fun. But then also they were like, also just do whatever. Just do whatever. I was like, okay. Like one of the briefs was like, okay, just design your like ideal, like your dream festival outfit. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. So that was really fun. But yeah, like it was my first experience doing that type of thing. So it's like working with different artists, working with a big brand and working on generative assets. So yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. But you're also part of the Crypto Lady Gang. So what has that been experienced like being a member of just that group?
It's pretty awesome. So like I think that's one of the cool things as well about this space. So there's a few groups like that I'm part of. So there's Crypto Lady Gang, there's Bored Ape Ladies, and then there's also the Ghost Club. So like each of those 3 are collectives in a way. That's how kind of I view them. Like they work in kind of slightly different ways. For like with Crypto Lady Gang, I've been involved with that group almost from the beginning. So Sam, also known as the Mystic, she invited me to be part of the platform right after she started it. And it's grown a whole bunch since. And it's been awesome. So I've actually found a lot of people now that I consider my closest friends in the space have been through that group. Some of my favorite artists, also a bunch of opportunities. So Sam works really hard to find opportunities for the group.
Right.
So being part of other projects or being involved, like for example, there was an opportunity to have our work displayed at NFT NYC. Like there's lots of opportunities like that come through that group, but also just like in terms of sharing or like supporting each other. So, you know, we have a Discord and okay, somebody's released something, guys, can you help me share this tweet? And, you know, it's like this real like supportive group environment. It's really lovely. And lots of the groups have that same energy where it's like we all love what we all do. We're just like, it's like hype gangs basically. But they have slightly different focuses. So like with Crypto Lady Gang, obviously the focus is on, you know, women and femmes in the space. Similarly with Bored Ape Ladies, you know, we do have some men and we have an AI artist as well. But again, it was about equity in terms of the people that are involved. And that was just literally creating artwork, creating derivatives of Bored Apes. So that there would be more feminine apes. Some of them aren't that feminine, but like, you know, just expand the repertoire of that particularly iconic brand. And then with the Ghost Club, which is the one that Mumba founded, again, this is kind of built around this Discord where each of the artists have their own like channel, and we can kind of share what we're doing. They do a lot of live streams. Again, awesome opportunities in terms of in NYC and like different conferences and stuff, and collaborations. There's some extremely awesome collaborations happening in that space. So yeah, I just like hanging out with all the cool artists all the time. It's really fun. Yeah,
that's really, really cool. Now, how did you first like get familiar with Web3? Like when was that time where you got familiar with Web3, especially with NFTs? Like when you first heard of NFTs, like was it like, you know, oh, what is this? Like what is a non-fungible token? Like, you know, what was your whole, you know, thing first getting involved with NFTs and Web3?
Yeah, so when I probably got in last year, so it was around July last year, so we're coming up on about a year. But I had an awareness of the space before that. It wasn't particularly positive, I'll be honest. So I feel like I kind of had like the loose understanding of something to do with crypto and the blockchain. There's art involved. I didn't really think about the non-fungible part of it. I was like, I don't know, that's just a letter, it's a word. I didn't really think about it. And like a lot of the rhetoric I had seen was like, oh, they're evil, they're scams, they're really exclusive. So it's like, that doesn't sound like I would have a fun time over there. So I didn't really think about it. And then last summer, it was like during the lockdown, and a friend of mine who I know from the Dublin design scene, she had started making art in her downtime and she started minting it, and she was posting stories on Instagram. So I think a lot of people, or certainly for me, like I was spending all my time on Instagram. I really didn't think about Twitter. Now this year it's the total opposite. I'm spending most of my time on Twitter and I'm spending less and less time on Instagram. But for me, they're a real, like, that's a real demonstration of where the Web2 versus Web3 crowd are.
Right.
But I was super grateful to her because she was like, oh, I'm sharing my experience everywhere. And her commitment to sharing that on Instagram, which is where there's less Web3 and there's more Web2 people, just as a very general distinction, meant that I saw it. And I was like, well, she's having a nice time. And this seems quite positive. And I can relate to her. Maybe I'll take a look. And then ensued a 3-week deep dive where I just got totally obsessed with figuring out as much as I could about what was happening. And I've been hooked ever since. But yeah, so it was around last summer, but that's how I came in. So it took me seeing like a trusted, positive narrative from somebody that I knew to, I mean, maybe it was I gave myself permission, but like I think a lot of us fall into this trap of if you don't really look into it and you just see these messages, you're like, okay, well, that's obviously what it is. That's what I'm hearing. You don't really look into it. I think it's easy for people to just stay there. But because I had this very like particularly trusted, relevant narrative, I was like, all right, there's more to this. And actually, what harm is it going to do? It was my first lesson in DIYR, I did my own research. And I was like, okay, yes, it's not perfect. Like there's obviously lots of stuff that isn't ideal, as is in every single space.
Right.
But I was like, I think I could find somewhere for myself here. I can see myself, or I found artists. I found the one of one niche, which was, I think it's a particularly wholesome corner of the NFT space. So I do think I got lucky in terms of where I found myself within the space. And yeah, like that, the people that I found early on, or that I sought out, I guess, were the people who were talking about things I care about. So they were talking about it being inclusive and being diverse. They were talking about different art mediums. They were talking about how hard it is to onboard people, or they were talking about that negative narrative and be like, well, that might be the case now, but maybe we can change that. So that really appealed to me as well. I was like, okay, yeah, this is a really early new technology. Why does it have to be like everything else, which has not been ideal for women or underrepresented groups? I was like, yes, I'm going to go in here and see if there's room for me or if I can be valuable in this space. I like it.
Yeah, right, exactly. I got familiar with NFTs like technically kind of last year because there was a nail artist that DM'd me that I follow, and she support me, and I love what she does. Her name is Gracie J, and her Instagram handles at the editorial nail, and she got me familiar with NFTs. She was asking me, do you know what an NFT is? And I was like, no. She's explaining to me about the whole thing. And I was like, I didn't think about it either. I was like, what is this?
This doesn't affect me. Yeah.
It's like, like, well, what is this? And then fast forward, I got in the Clubhouse within this year, like around like spring, like March or somewhere around there, getting familiar with NFTs. There was a club called NFT Tips. And of course, that group used to be, active, but it's not active anymore, but they talked about like NFTs and, Web3 and stuff like that. And, that's how, even with me, I'm still a beginner at understanding what NFTs and Web3 and crypto is, you know what I mean? So for you, when you're in, like, would you consider yourself to be at the pro level, intermediate, beginners level? Like,
yeah, I'm definitely not a pro. Like, I feel like I do think I'm experienced. Like, I think I have spent a lot of time here. And it's funny too, because when you say like, oh, I've been here a year, like I think in other contexts, I'd be like, that's no time. When I think of that in design, I'm like, okay, a year into design, I was absolutely a baby. But I think a year in the NFT space, because everything moves so fast and there's so much happening, it's kind of long. It's like, no, I've been around a few cycles, I've seen a few things. Obviously, if anybody tells you they can predict what's coming next, they're full of it. We can't. We don't really know what's happening next, but at least we have the benefit of a year and a half, 2 years of insight into what's been happening. And I feel like from an NFT perspective, like I think I'm pretty experienced, but I'm not a pro. I think my big gap is I'd love to learn more about the underlying tech. I feel like I really launched myself into the creative side of it, and like the community and the art and from a utility perspective, a few different things on an NFT technical point of view, but really I've been in the art space and the creative space. But I'm really conscious of the fact that I don't really understand how the blockchain works. I know about crypto because I need to know about it for NFTs as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, like I do think I have a big knowledge gap in terms of like the underlying tech. I do get really excited about like learning about what people are doing with the technology, even with smart contracts and what we can do with NFTs. But yeah, I wouldn't consider myself a pro, not yet. Yeah, I think probably very few people are in everything across the board. I think there's probably experts in like niches. Yeah, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, that's fair. Now I want you to talk about more about your NFT collection called the Foofies. Like, what's that collection? Like, what was the whole process behind like coming up with the Foofies?
Yeah, so the Foofies is a long time coming. I think when I committed to it, I didn't really explicitly know that, but now that I've been reflecting on it, this character they started when I was in art college. So like one of my big lines of investigation there was around perception. And I've heard this thing, which I don't know how true or not it is now, but like the high level thing is, we only use a small portion of our brains to perceive the world around us. Like we can't actually, like our senses can't physiologically perceive our world, which is why people talk about this idea of like reality being subjective, which is a whole other wormhole. But yeah, I was just really intrigued by this notion of fills in the gaps. What gaps? I was like, what could be in the gaps? Anything. So that was that line of questioning that I was chasing through lots of different mediums and lots of different formats. But of course that led me down, like all the research that I did that time, I kind of got stuck into like micro worlds, invisible worlds, bacteria, mushroom, mycelium networks, all of this stuff which exists around us, but we don't really see or notice, and has this whole separate, it's like in a parallel universe. Which obviously ties into all the sci-fi stuff that I was super interested in, influenced by. So yeah, all of those things kind of came together into the Foofies. And I'm really grateful that I found the NFT in like the Web3 space, because I don't think I would have deliberately set out to put all that stuff together in this format if it wasn't for finding this space and finding people that were like, interested in like some of the art that I had shared. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. But yeah, it was a very deliberate, like it was a very conscious decision for me to be like, I think I can pull all of this stuff together into this character, which fits really neatly into this lovely cross section that I found in the space of tech and art and community. And these like cute little weirdos. And it's a style that, wasn't necessarily very commercial. Like, I don't know if I could have sold that to clients, but it's self-led. And I'm finding an audience, like an independent audience, and a community around it that are like into it, and like they're into the narrative and the story the world that I'm trying to build around them, and they're actively involved in that. So I'm like, okay, this is all the things that I enjoy. This is a perfect scenario for me to try and do this. So I did, and I think I started with, it did lay out. I did spend some time thinking at the beginning, like I did plan them out in terms of how many I'm going to make. I knew I was going to do them as one-of-one. So at the time when I started that, they're kind of a bit of a hybrid between like a profile pic project, but also they're one-of-ones because I'm doing them hand drawing them individually. But also even the way that I'm selling them, like I'm raffling them, I'm doing private sale raffles as opposed to dropping them and letting people collect them. And that had come from my experience in the space of, as a collector, losing out on things to gas wars and be like, oh man, I don't want that. So I was like trying to also create, and this comes as well from my background in design and like user experience design, where I was like, how do I create a good positive experience that I would enjoy based on what I've experienced? But that I think other people would also enjoy. And yeah, I thought about all the different aspects of like they've got elements, and there's like the colors are very calculated, how I use them. There's pods of 5. Like there's all this like, what would I call it? It's not quite lore yet, but there's characteristics which are very deliberate. And I deliberately made them so that I could build it out, so that I could expand, so I could create a story around them. Because I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I knew it was going to be a big commitment. I knew that because of the time I could commit, they would be quite slow. I knew it would take me a long time to do them. So I think that's a good thing to kind of mention and consider. Like if you're thinking of doing this, an NFT project that is like a collection, like that is a collectibles collection, which is like a unified character base. It is a big commitment, and like understanding that from the beginning is important. That's how they started.
Yeah, it does take planning too. Like what's your whole intent behind it? Like what's going to be like the theme? It can also be about like what's going on, Is there a certain issue you want to focus on? So definitely, I think also planning too is part of the process of having an NFT collection. Now, what would be like your advice in terms of pricing like one-of-one NFTs or having like, pricing in terms of an NFT collection?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that ties into like what we talked about earlier in terms of where do you start? Like, what is your baseline? So like when I started, I didn't have an existing audience. I didn't have an audience that I brought into Web3. I didn't have a Web3 audience. So it was very much, it was a little bit of trial and error at the start. I could try different formats. So some of the first NFTs I sold I had set up as auctions, which now in retrospect, I think is probably a less common way for people to collect. Unless they're short auctions and you're like using like that kind of 1 or 2 days to kind of really build interest. And yeah, like I had priced them at 0.1. And now most of the work that I start at is half of that. But it's also dependent on, let's see what I thought about it. Yeah. So when I kind of started to branch out into editions or into this kind of collectible type of project, there's kind of a volume thing. So I was like, well, there's going to be more of them. So they're less scarce than a one-of-one. I think one-of-ones are harder because they're unique. That's the whole point. That's the appeal. And I think that's why a lot of people use the auction format them, because then you can let the market decide. But the trick there is figuring out where to start it, which comes back to that question of what's the least you feel comfortable at going for versus setting it low enough that it's accessible to start people get interested in it. But yeah, it is tricky. Like I think for the market at the moment, I think it's really hard because I mean, I think the trend at the moment, of course, as well as freelance, where people are kind of generating their income through the secondary market, which isn't guaranteed obviously either, or they're quite low priced because things are slow, which is where you see people doing kind of large editions, or yeah, exactly like that. You're dependent more on secondary than you are on primary, which I think isn't a bad approach. Like I think thinking about the secondary market is really important if you're going to enter this space. It's one of the main perks, to be honest. I mean, the fact that you can set up your artwork and generate secondary royalties in perpetuity is awesome. Like that doesn't really exist in the traditional art world or in the Web2, even contracting world. So yeah, like I do think that's worth considering. But I also have to consider like, what do you need to survive? Sometimes just trying to figure out what bills you need covered can help you from a starting point. But like, what's the least I need to make per week or per month? And obviously it's hard to figure that out in the context of crypto. So like it's obviously a very fluctuating currency and you have to figure out about cashing that out to cover your costs versus what you might leave in there for an investment purpose. So like there's like another layer as well when you're considering pricing in the NFT world or in the Web3 world, crypto art world, because you're also thinking about that cash out. You're thinking about the fiat value of what you earned from the crypto. If I sold something for 0.25 6 months ago, it's wildly different to what it is now. Would have gone a lot further. So, maybe you need to think about pricing higher for one-of-ones if you're at the same level of production. Then that's the other side of the thing, is like how many pieces can you realistically make and sell. So there's two sides to that. There's like how much you can physically produce without burning out. And then there's the second side, which is how many can you sell, because you might create them, but like they might necessarily sell in the time frame that you need them to. So I think that's kind of a bigger question as well, or a bigger consideration in terms of freelance life. It's that same thing. It's like, do you have enough saved or tucked away that if you have a quiet month, you're okay, versus, can you squirrel some of that away if you have a particularly good one. So there's all these kind of things around financial planning that should be considered when you're trying to price your work. And it's not easy. It is not easy. If all else fails, if you do have a community you can ask them, see what people will be comfortable spending on your work, and then see if that also sits right with you. You also have the benefit of try something, list something for a price that you think feels good. If it doesn't move, you can lower the price, or vice versa, start something low and that goes really fast, and maybe the next time you can increase a little bit. I would caution that sometimes I do see artists raising their prices quite quickly. It's like if you sell a piece for 0.1, the next piece is suddenly 0.2 or 3, and like that might be too big of a jump too soon. So maybe settle into a price point. If you find that there's a price that seems to work for your audience and your collectors, stick with that for a while and see how it goes. If demand increases a lot, then increase it a little bit. But I think seeing people jump from a price which had been working to something significantly like 2 or 3 times what it was, I often see it stagnate. So I would say, yeah, if you're going to work on raising your prices, or if that's going to be deliberately part of your strategy, which I recommend, I mean, get paid, just take your time with it. Just, you know, watch the market, stay in touch with the people who are supporting you, see where they're at, and try and somehow bring that all together to find your magical price.
Yeah, right. Most
a lot to think about, actually. Now that I say that out loud, I'm like, well, actually, all of these things need to be thought about.
All those things you got to take into consideration. But I definitely want to get into the marketing aspect in terms of like promoting, you know, one NFTs or NFT collections. So what are some marketing tools that have worked for you in terms of like putting out your work?
Not marketing has worked for me. So I've never really, or at least not until recently when I started reflecting on it, I didn't really set out with like a deliberate marketing plan. I kind of came into the space curious first, just like, what's going on over here? What are you guys doing? And getting to know people. But I think now when I'm thinking about it, that's what I was doing. That was my marketing. In reality, it was chatting to people. It was engaging with people. It was getting to know people. And most of the time I did that on Twitter. So I think a lot of, especially if we're talking explicitly about the NFT and the Web3 community, a lot of us spend our time on Twitter because it's quite easy to have a back and forth engagement there.
Right.
So that's what I did. Like, I mean, really at the beginning, I was being nosy. I was like getting excited about what people are doing. I was sharing it. I was asking people questions. I think it's, you know, people talk about there's this whole notion, there's no stupid questions, just ask whatever you want. But that's really legit here. Like, I think a lot of people recognize that there's a need for people to talk about their experiences. So they do. Right. But like, get on Twitter Spaces. Like, there's just at any given moment, if you find a few people to follow on Twitter that are in this space, and, you know, the algorithm will start to figure that out, and then will start to suggest people to you. So follow that. Right. And then you'll find yourself that there'll be all these Twitter Spaces of people talking about their experiences, especially if you seek out ones which are deliberately aimed at teaching or at educating or onboarding or people that are beginners in the space. Because people do share their knowledge and their experiences, and it's pretty awesome. So yeah, a lot of it was just me being visible, being present, talking to people, being myself, sharing what I liked, sharing what I was doing, but without explicitly trying to sell it. Like, I think that's a big shift from if you've been working in like a traditional art sense or in a Web2 art world or design or illustration world. You're used to more of a sell to broadcast mindset where you're like, I need to sell my wares, I need to shill it. Like, so shilling in the NFT space is like the version of that. And I definitely did that at the start, and I assumed that this is how it's done. And I fell into that trap, and I was like, oh no, now I'm like, this is engagement farming. But I met a lot of friends. That way. So you might find collectors in those threads. And if you're entering the space, or if you've been in here a little while, you'll know what I'm talking about. But there are some genuine, authentic people that do, you know, look for people to share their art or their NFTs in threads on Twitter. A lot of the time it's engagement farming, but there's loads of other artists in those threads, so you might find people to connect with on a more pure level, but don't necessarily expect to find your collectors there. So from a marketing perspective, it's maybe softer. So it's you building a community, a network of people to, you know, get to know and share and support, and vice versa. It works both ways. I think that's a big part of the space. Is it's a dialogue, it's a back and forth, it's a relationship. It's not the same as Web2 social media marketing, where you're broadcasting to fans and you're just trying to get as many eyeballs on you as possible. I think in this space, like, follower count isn't as important. I think engagement is more important. So it's like, reply to people. Like, I spent if I do feel sorry for the people that have notifications on for me on Twitter, because I just get like 40 GM replies a day from me. But I spend my time chatting to people, and like, I think I struggled at the beginning with that, because I think from I had a feeling at the beginning that wasn't work. Like, that was like me wasting time talking to my friends on Twitter. But I'm like, no, that's just capitalist productivity brainwashing. I'm like, no, this is me being present in the space that I want to be present and active in, getting to know people. And people are very willing to engage and to share their knowledge and to share their experiences with you. So I really love that. And that was a big part of what I tried to do in my Web2 life, in design, in mentoring. And yeah, I see that's kind of like a default state of mind for people that are in this space, who are genuinely committed to being in the space. And it's like, yes, come over here. We will tell you what we know. We will also be quite explicit about the fact that we don't necessarily know that this is correct, but this is what we've been through. And yeah, I think there's lots of benefits from a visibility and a marketing perspective to just being in the space authentically and chatting to people. That's really what I did. I stopped trying to find collectors. I stopped trying to sell my work. I just started getting to know people, and if they were interested in what I was doing, they would connect. They would have a look at what I was doing. Oh, practical tip: set up your pinned tweet. So if you are talking to people and people are interested in what you're saying, or they find you funny or whatever it is that they're getting to know you, they'll probably check your profile. But if you just check into somebody's profile on Twitter, you see this kind of top bio section. So set up your bio, set up your link, and have a pinned tweet there that introduces you and what you do and shows off some of your work, your best work. So that way, like my pinned tweet has done so much work for me, because if people come onto your profile and they can see what you're about and they can easily find your links, you could find people that will, connect with your work and buy it. But at the very least, it means that if people are the people that you're engaging with, they can very quickly see what your vibe is and whether they're into it or not. So that would be my practical tip from a marketing perspective. Pretty underrated, but pretty powerful. Pinned tweets, get them right.
Yeah, exactly. Now I want to get into Web3. Like, what are some things that you've seen within the Web3 and NFT space? Like, in terms of NFTs, like what are like some unique things that you've seen?
So many things. I think one of the big surprises for me was actually that thing around community, around how relationships are formed. So again, it's me thinking about how my mindset in kind of designing Web2 was. It's you're networking, you're broadcasting. Whereas in Web3 in the NFT space, it is closer, it's more connected. It feels more casual, maybe. Like I've kind of made that, I've said it before, where it's like, it's not broadcasting to fans, it's connecting with friends.
Right.
And that's a real difference. And I don't think I really understood that until I got into it. But even as well, there's one big surprise for me as well, was that the community, or the creative community, is really supportive. So I think a lot of people are used to having quite a competitive kind of environment or mentality when you're competing for clients, you're competing for art opportunities or whatever it might be. I think, and I've experienced that too, where there seems to be a real like division in the wider kind of creative world, or there can be, depending on what space you're in. But I think for me, I was really pleasantly surprised by how genuinely supportive people felt, because often sometimes that feels really insincere, but I'm like, oh no, I think these people genuinely are happy that I'm succeeding, and I'm really happy that they're succeeding. So there's like a real shift in, I think, mindset for people in the space. It does, even though it's really saturated, there's tons of people in here, trying to be visible and, be successful and make something here. But at the same time, I see less of that kind of toxic, competitive mindset here. It's like, just because you're succeeding doesn't mean I can't. And I think that's really embodied. I mean, I think it probably ties into the wider concept of Web3 and decentralization and what it's all about. But I've really seen that embodied in the artists and the creatives and the communities that I've gotten involved in, certainly. I mean, I'm sure there's super toxic niches and communities here too, but the environments that I found myself in, or that I've deliberately sought out, have been that. It has been what is the saying? Rising tide raises all ships. Is that it? Something like that. Sure. That's wrong, isn't it? But it's that kind of thing, is like, if other people are succeeding, it just elevates the whole space for everybody. So I've seen that. I felt that I've been championed. I've also very enthusiastically championed others, and not felt like that's going to diminish or dim my light. I'm like, no, we can literally, it sounds so cheesy, but I was like, we can all shine.
Yeah.
But like, it's that, but it doesn't feel as cheesy. But yeah, that's been really nice. Yeah. And unexpected. I didn't expect that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing too. We can all succeed together, and it's cool to see other people win, and it's cool for other people to see you win as well. And the thing is too, like the thing with NFTs, what I find very interesting, as I'm learning more about the space before I jump into it, is that people are taking their NFTs and using it as like utilities. Like, hey, if you get this NFT, you get some merch. Like, for example, like the Smirks, Like if you get their NFT, you may get a Smirks chain or something like that. Or, Doodles, you'll probably get some from Doodles or something like that. So the thing is that I like how people are using NFTs, not just in terms of just making money, but it's, is having a bigger meaning to it, or the money goes to a certain important cause and stuff like that. So that's really cool, to see.
Yeah, like I think that's part of the distinction as well between like the technology versus what it represents. So like we've been talking about art a lot, and like art is like the obvious first place for NFTs to start, but like NFTs are a whole underlying technology that are powerful in all sorts of ways that we have no idea about yet, and I'm sure people are going to come up with all sorts of awesome innovative ways to use them. But yeah, I think the notion of verifiable ownership of tokens that can like that give you access to other utilities or value or perks or whatever it might be. I think there's so much in that. Like as well, I've seen something recently as well, which I think is really true, which is like, I talk about myself in the context of being an NFT artist, but really I'm an artist, and NFTs are the medium. They're the vessel that I'm using to, share that art with people who are interested in it.
Right.
And yeah, there's income from that for sure. But I think I do get really excited about like, okay, well, what else could we do with this? There's more that can go with this. And I think there's value on both sides of this coin. So I think people are, minting work on the blockchain, which is art, and it's purely art. And I love that. I absolutely 100% support that and should be valued as such. But then there's also, this layer, which I think for me, I think I've kind of played in both sides of that fence, maybe, where it's like, there's the one of one art, which I'm creating, which, I'm not really committing anything extra to that beyond you enjoying the art. And, maybe if me as an artist and as a brand expands, more people will be interested, and you might be able to make some more money off it. I don't know. That would be awesome, but I'm not guaranteeing that. Versus the Foofies, which is very deliberately me trying to build this world, this ecosystem, this character, which I want to expand further, that I want to, like what I've done with it as well is like, exactly like you've mentioned, like I'm using some of the funds to plant trees in like the local forest, which is important to me. Or I did a lot of work recently where I made art for projects which are supporting, queer organizations and charities and queer results. That's also really important to me. So like all of these things, being able to funnel and create funds for that, super, like I think that's awesome. Then I'm like, I can also bring more value. It's like, okay, I've come up with these different combinations. Depending on what you hold, you can get like a free airdrop of like these other characters as part of phase 2. So like there's all these extra layers of value. And I don't know if I would explicitly call it utility just yet, because I think utility is attached to something maybe broader than purely NFTs. I think when I think about utility, I think of a wider ecosystem, maybe incorporating Web2 or physical, thinking about things that aren't explicitly owning an NFT. They're wider than that, I think, or at least in my mind, that's what I'm kind of trying to attach to that. So for me, what I'm doing is like the moment is like I'm adding value to maybe a slightly different take on it. But I love that I can do that. I'm also like super excited by like the notion of dynamic NFTs. I'm like, I can change what this looks like after a certain event or a trigger or whatever it might be. So I've got all sorts of things brewing around what you can do with it. So like that's distinctly different from owning a piece of art which is static and doesn't change, which wouldn't be possible without this particular art. Well, maybe it is, but like to my knowledge or to my experience, I wouldn't have been able to do that in another context where I can build a story, I can create an event, I can create a happening, an experience that changes something or that adds something or takes something away, maybe, who knows. So I find that side of things really exciting as well. And I love seeing all the cool stuff that people are doing with the technology or with like the idea of a token as opposed to a piece of art, which I think is more fundamental to the tech side of it.
Yeah, right, exactly. I recently found out that like ETH is like, worth a little like less cheaper than it was previously. And I find it to be very interesting because like, ETH, like when you pay for gas fees, from what I've heard also is like the prices are through the roof. With Solana, is much cheaper. So what is like your take on crypto in those different areas of Solana and Ethereum?
Yeah, so I think when I started, I was automatically drawn to Ethereum just because it was the most widely used, or like the people that I was finding and connecting with, and that were creating NFTs and artwork, that's where they were minting. And I think I definitely had a moment of pause where I was like, I did do a bit of research, and I was like, okay, it's pretty taxing from an environmental energy perspective. And like, I was like, that's a bummer. But I think it was a balance between where people are. So it's like, you have to figure out like, okay, can I do the same thing on another chain? Now, I had no idea about Solana at the beginning. In the meantime, I have, collected some, but I haven't got any NFTs on Sol yet. But, I minted a few pieces on Tezos, for example, as an alternative to see how that would go. So I definitely experimented with a few different chains. I think I always came back to ETH, just because it's where most of the people are. I do. I also very naively thought that ETH2, like that the transition, the merge to proof of stake was happening sooner than it has come around. So it's been coming for a long time. Now it does feel imminent, which I think will be a big improvement in terms of gas fees. I think recently gas has chilled out a bit, but I think a lot of people who have been in the space for a while can remember gas fees being outrageous, which is not a good time. It is not a good time at all. So I do hope that with the move towards proof of stake, that on Ethereum in particular should be mitigated largely. I just wish it was here sooner, obviously, which most people do. I do think it's awesome to see some of the other chains expanding. Like, I've seen some great people do work on Cardano as well. Even Polygon, like, as well as a layer 2 option. Like, I think it's just about figuring out where you fit in and figuring out, can you find that audience? Can you build up enough momentum and enough interest in what you're doing in those ecosystems? And like, tons of people are doing that. So, and I think even with some of the other chains as well, there's probably even bigger opportunity to establish yourself early on. So I definitely encourage people to figure out, where they would feel comfortable operating if they're going to move into NFTs. I think from my perspective, Ethereum has worked well for the most part. I mean, sure. I mean, it hurts this year versus last year. If you were to calculate it on a fiat on a dollar or euro basis, what I'm making now from the work I'm doing is a lot less than it would have been a year ago, but I'm okay with that. I'm like, there's this mentality of one ETH is one ETH, which is really hard this year because things are a lot less than they were. Now, it's funny because actually this time last year, we're not too far off where it was. I remember when I started, I think ETH was worth, in euros, it was worth like 1,700. So yes, it's a bit less now, but it wasn't like I came in when it was like 4K, which is, a bigger drop. So obviously if you were making work when ETH is at its highest, or when it was like, even 6 months ago, you obviously have to adjust. Like, there's a lot of adaptability that's necessary, I think, for this space because of the nature of being connected to crypto. So it's exactly that thing of like, oh, okay, so if you're using this as your main income, like a lot of people, it isn't their main income. Like, they're here on a part-time basis and they have their main kind of income from a fiat perspective, and this is supplementary. If your goal is to try and move into the space in a full-time capacity, then you have to be able to pivot as the market pivots. So I think that's like a big key thing that I see in the people who do well in this space consistently, is they're able to adapt to the market conditions. They're able to try different things and experiment. They're able to, play around with their pricing or their formats so that they can maintain. So yeah, it's like what works now might work in a month. We could have a totally different market ecosystem, whatever it might be. There's these trends that come and go. Things have their moments. So like last summer was like profile pictures. This summer maybe it'll be more one-of-ones. Gaming is coming up. Like, there's lots of things. There's lots of different areas within the NFT space which seem to have their moment, where they rise. And there's an ebb and flow. You can come in and you can, follow that if you want. But, for me, it's like I knew that I wanted to be in the one-of-one space, but also the art space. And I've stayed pretty steadfast to that. But yeah, I've changed things as I've gone, because you have to be able to adjust. So that's worth keeping in mind too. Yeah, gotta be flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is there anything that you'd like to see more of in the Web3 and NFT community?
I mean, I do want to see more people. I think I would like to see more diverse creators come in. And I think there's been a big push, certainly in the last year, 6 months. There was a real marked awareness. We're like, okay, this is looking an awful lot like the Web 2 world looked like as we were building out creative industries and tech industries, which is to say dominated by cis white men. We're like, okay, maybe we can have some more people get involved. So I think that's still going to be a thing. Like, I think there's a lot of people that are really focused and doing a lot of work in creating, you know, a Web3 space which is more representative. But it's not there. Like, I mean, it's still, we still see the same things mirrored. We still see gaps in terms of the amount of creators or people that are visible and that are successful across genders, across, you know, races, ethnicities, all of the things. So yeah, I do think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of creating this. I mean, I think you know, the idea of Web3 and decentralization, you know, is sold a little bit as this like self-owned, you know, utopia. But I'm like, okay, but if the people who own that are the same as the people who own everything else, the centralized entities, then it's going to look the exact same, just a crypto. So yeah, I do think there's still a long way to go to, make it a bit more representative. I think there's probably a bit more to do as well in terms of onboarding and education. So again, there's definitely people working in that space that are trying to make it safer. So I think one of the big concepts for me, which was a hard lesson, is this idea of, you know, self-custodian wallets, money. You are responsible for all the things you do here. Right. Which is the point, you know, it's the point. But also if you mess up, there's no backsies. So there is this kind of moment of, obviously people are going to exploit that, they're going to take advantage of that. I think a lot of the negative rhetoric is founded, like there are people trying to con you and scam you. There are all sorts of ways that you can get wrecked here. And I think there's probably definitely a bit more work, I think, to help people get there. I think people talk about needing to help people, but they don't necessarily do it. So I think there's still a little bit of a disconnect between talking the talk and walking the walk in the space. And yeah, there's definitely some people doing it where they've got the resources, where they're really putting a lot of time into helping people very deliberately and explicitly through onboarding and, you know, educating in terms of what to watch out for. But a lot of people are coming in and learning that the hard way, or they're getting burnt, or they're seeing all the things which they're warned about. But they're warned about too abstractly. I think we need to be more explicit about it. So those are two things. Yeah, that's the thing. You know, scams are, you know, going around, and, you know, we live in, you know, desperate times where people are just trying to do anything to make money, try to scam people and stuff like that, especially those who are just trying to, you know, make ends meet, you know, and that's not cool at all to scam anybody. You know, what do you get out of scamming somebody? You know what I mean? And the thing is also too, another thing is like with AI, we're slowly getting into AI a little bit. You know, the DALL-E 2 making all these types of paints. So you like put two pictures together from Google and they just start making like a picture and stuff like that. We're having slowly self-driving cars and, you know, all this other stuff. So it's crazy. Yeah, there's lots going on. There's a lot to try and keep up with. Like, I think that is the thing as well. It's like, yeah, maybe it's the explicit. It's like the space has so much potential, but it has potential on both sides. Like, I mean, it's just human nature. Like, there's obviously going to be good and bad. And I think if you want to be in the space and if you want to be here in a very meaningful way, and there's lots of people who do want to create that and who want to use the technology and the concept to create something that's, you know, a bit more meaningful than what we have at the moment, or hopefully an improvement. I mean, that's the whole idea, is to try and improve on what we have. I think it's going to take a long time. I think when we talk about Web3 now, it's not really Web3, it's kind of Web 2.2 maybe. Like, I don't think we've really fully gotten there, but we're working towards it. Which is why I think there is this great potential and this great need to be quite conscious and deliberate about what we're forming, because we're going to bring all the same biases that we had in Web 2 and Web 1 and pre-web. Like, that's all coming with us. We're all still human. So yeah, I think there needs to be a real conscious effort about that. And in terms of all of these new technologies as they come about, being very deliberate about ethics, about how they're used, about, yeah, I mean, I think there's like this whole sub topic of value and where it's placed and how it's placed and by whom. So maybe this is more of a philosophical conversation, but yeah, like, I think it is a space where there's a whole load of potential for awesome stuff to happen. But the people that are doing it need to be very deliberate about the ways that they're doing it.
Right.
And even just to know, it's like, well, obviously we have biases. We've seen that in play in all sorts of scenarios. And just to be more conscious of it. But also it's just kind of a good space too. So it's like, this is like the doom and gloom. Be careful, but also have a good time. So like, I mean,
Right.
that's the other thing. It's like, there is awesome stuff happening in the space. There's really great people here.
Right.
And on a day-to-day basis, it's great fun. Not everything, obviously. But yeah, I think it is that kind of recognition of we can be here, we can do good stuff, but we also need to be quite mindful of what we're doing and not just like fumble our way through and unintentionally create something which is worse than what we have at the moment, which is totally a possibility too. Like, you know, it's this positive future isn't a given. It's not a definite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, you know, when I first learned about NFTs, I was like, am I late to the party? Like, you know, because, you know, you see people already putting out NFT collections, you know, they know like so much more than you. And, you know, you would think like, okay, am I late to the space? Is this a popular thing? NFTs and Web3 and crypto? But it's like, you know, like how you said before, it's still in its early stages.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. I felt like that too. Like it was like a year ago.
Right.
And I think a lot of people do like measure themselves off of like a lot of the things that have gone mainstream now. I think Bored Apes is a good landmark or like milestone where people are like, oh, I missed Bored Apes. I was like, yeah, but look at all the stuff that came after. And there's going to be so much more
Right.
stuff that comes beyond that. And it's not necessarily going to be in that, you know, profile pic type of space. There's like so many things happening. And there's opportunities every day. And I see that. And I think that's maybe a mentality that I see or that I adopted from even just like collecting or selling NFTs, like from a collector investment type of perspective, where you're like, you're obviously going to miss a bunch of stuff, which is going to be super successful,
Right.
but you never know when the next major thing is going to be. And yeah, sure, the space is getting, you know, it's building more and more traction and it's becoming more and more mainstream, but it's so far from being fully mainstream right now. Like, I mean,
Right.
I think get in when you can get in. Like, it's not like, oh, I mean, okay, I'm not sure if I can like think of a handy like comparison in like the existing world, but it's like, okay, you find something and it's already really established. Of course, you're still going to try and get involved. It just means you need to be more creative about how you go about it. I think at the moment there's so many ways in. Like whatever your interest right now, whatever your skills are right now in a Web2 setting or whatever setting, you can find somewhere to put those to use in this environment, in this space. So I think, yeah, like the conversation we've had today is very art focused, but like, oh man, there's so many different ways and different skills that are necessary for this space. I mean, even if I think of my background in design, I'm like, okay, we need designers and user experience designers in particular to just really come help with this, because I think that's one big thing which is still in progress. So I think the focus right now, or up until now, because there has been a new technology, has been on the tech, has been on the infrastructure,
right,
has been on that side of things. And now it's like, okay, now there's enough people here using this. Now we need to actually just make it work better. We need to actually start applying some design. And obviously some people are doing this really well, but others aren't. And I think that comes back to the onboarding thing too. It's like, it needs to be easy for people to join.
Right.
Yeah. Because if we're trying to solve a problem, obviously, and that's the whole point. But yeah, if it's hard for people to engage with that, then it's going to be slower. So yeah, I think that's probably going to be another big move that happens soon, is like people from different disciplines and different backgrounds, skill sets, bringing that to a Web3 context. Because there's so many different considerations. I love the design consideration, because I'm like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of kind of patterns and things that you're like, okay, well, people are used to doing things this way. But if you, sign a message on your crypto wallet and it's not real, or it's not for what you haven't read it properly, you could lose a bunch of money. Or NFTs, if you're collecting NFTs, you have to be like, there's like this extra layer of, maybe it's education. So like, I think in some contexts within design or within digital design, that's like super important as you kind of take people through products. But I think in this Web3 world, it's like, this is super important. Like, people need to know that if they commit to this action, that there is consequences potentially. And that's not always like a big priority, depending on what you're working on in a Web2 or in a traditional design sense. So yeah, I think there's a bunch of questions that need to be answered on that side of things too. Yeah, I would encourage people to take a look. I think a lot of people, if they've heard about NFTs, they might have heard of the art side of things, or like the profile picture side of things, and mightn't necessarily see where they fit in. But I do think it is, it's a whole thing. Like, there's so many different layers, like marketing, PR, writing, technology, development. all of that. And gaming, there's a huge side of things to gaming. Sports, like, I mean, there's so many different industries. And, you know, you're in beauty, like, I think there's so many different applications as well, like the different industries that can come into this space and bring something useful that they mightn't realize yet, because it's not what has been seen, because it's not what's been popularized or what's been successful so far. Those are opportunities. Those are opportunities.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Most definitely. Now, why do you think women should join the NFT and Web3 space?
I mean, that comes back to that other point of, like, I just think there's this need for us to have a more balanced, more representative ecosystem. And this applies to everything. Like, I think Web3 is in that stage where, like I said, we have this opportunity to build it into something which is more representative, more meaningful for women, for other underrepresented groups. And also, I think we have a perspective that is vitally needed.
Right.
You know, it's like, that's the key thing. It's like, if this space, and I do really believe that Web3 and decentralization in general is going to become more and more relevant and more mainstream, applied in more different contexts in our day-to-day lives. I do think it'll take some time, obviously, but I do think it's happening, it's coming. So why wouldn't you want to be part of that? Like, I think, you know, women are awesome. They have great ideas. We've got experiences which are more nuanced, perhaps. And I think more voices is vital to the space. Why would you let this technology evolve without having yourself and your voice represented?
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, I don't think it's an obligation. I wouldn't suggest that anybody's obliged to take part in anything they're not interested in. But I think this is going to happen anyway. So it's kind of a case of, you can have an impact here. You can carve out something. You can define something early on. Instead of trying to change something that's already established, you can just help form it from the beginning, which was a real big appeal for me. I was like, oh yeah, okay. It's like, oh, imagine finding like the whole like .com stuff like really early. I mean, able to get in there before it went parabolic, and establish a status quo which wasn't exclusionary, which included you, which represented you, which took into account your needs. You can come in, you have a particular need that isn't answered in another context. Can you answer that in Web3? Because there's probably space for you. You know, there is no real established brands, companies. I don't know what way to put this, but like, you know, the way that if you think of like the world we're in now, or the brands or companies that we use day to day that are almost a given, it doesn't really exist in Web3 yet. So like, there's room for, I mean, if you're entrepreneurial, especially, like if you have an idea, if you think you can solve a problem, then there might be a way for you to do that in this world, in a Web3 world.
Right.
And you might have less competition. So you can define that without trying to, fight it and establish status quo. You can create that status quo, potentially, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Last but not least, where can people find you on social media, and how can people support your work?
So I spend most of my time on Twitter. My handle there is at Aoife O Dwyer. I'm also spending more time on Instagram now lately too, because I do want to try and be for other people what I had, which was to help people on board a bit or learn a bit more. So on Instagram, my handle it's at _ Aoife. So it's like at EFA, which is how it's pronounced, _ AOIFE, which is how it's spelled. Harder, but yeah, that's what was available. Okay. That's mostly where I am. And yeah, I've got links out to all the bits and bobs that I've got online. My collections and stuff are all linked from those places. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eva, for jumping onto the show. Your work is absolutely amazing. I love the pastel colors. I love how like the plants come out of the eyes. Like, your style is like so unique and so cool. Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
You're most welcome. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to click the bell for notifications. Also follow me on my social media platforms and visit my website, asiaticbird.com, and be on the lookout for more interviews involving Web3, NFTs, crypto, and the metaverse.